we've gone 10 o'clock. I think we'll get going. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar this morning. My name is Caroline Barker, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Anna Maria Lemmer and Maddie Gaunt, who are going to be talking to you about the CQC's new strategy and how it might impact your practices, what to do if CQC inspects your practice, how to handle the inspection process itself, and what to do if you get a report or rating that you disagree with. So it's great to see so many of you here today, and I hope that you find the session informative. For those of you who are not as familiar with Ridouts as others, we are a niche practice of health and social care regulatory lawyers, and we help providers of health and social care find solutions to difficult matters affecting their businesses. And this includes dealing with and handling the CQC, which is the subject of today's webinar. Now, we will be sharing slides and a recording of the webinar after the event, and towards the end of the session, we'll be doing Q&A. So if you do have any questions, there is the Q&A function. Not sure whether it'll appear at the bottom of your screen, at top of your screens, but please do pop your questions in there and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So all providers of health and social care, including GP practices, are facing a period of uncertainty and change. Over the pandemic, the CQC has changed how it works, how it inspects, and it is shifting its focus to services that are deemed a potential risk. Now, you might say that with 95% of GP practices being rated good or outstanding, that the risk to your practice is low. However, 54% of inspections carried out by the CQC year to date were triggered by information of concern. And in the same period, the CQC has seen a 75% increase in the use of their Give Feedback on Care form from the same period in the previous year. CQC, since April this year, so in a very short period, have undertaken just over 2,200 inspections in response to risk. And of the inspections that they've published, which is around the 1,700 mark, over 50% of those were rated requires improvement or inadequate. So no matter what your current rating is with CQC, if all the stars align or misalign rather, then this situation can change very quickly. So it's important to know what you can do and how to handle such a situation should it occur. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anna, who's going to give you an outline of the CQC's new strategy and how it might impact your practice. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Caroline. Next slide, please. Oh, a few more on. So this morning, I'm going to be discussing CQC's new strategy and monitoring approach, as Caroline mentioned, and I'm going to give you an update in relation to how it's working in practice and discuss the impact that it's having on GP practices. Next slide, please. So what is CQC's monitoring approach for the remainder of 2021 and going into 2022? Well, CQC helpfully, or not so helpfully, set this out for us in a webinar at the end of September. And this was a webinar for primary medical services, discussing how CQC is currently monitoring and prioritising inspections of GP practices. So the main headline from this webinar, and what some of you might have already experienced in recent inspections yourself or in recent monitoring, is that CQC is now focusing on looking for risk rather than improvements during its monitoring. Next slide, please. So CQC is currently focusing on using data and monitoring services in 3 key ways, and they're listed on the slide here. So the first one is being more targeted in its regulatory activity with a focus on risk rather than improvement. Secondly, bringing information together in one place. So all the data and information it holds on a service, having it in a central location for CQC to review on a monthly basis. And thirdly, developing elements of how CQC is going to work in the future. So CQC has said that they want to see a more real-time, up-to-date view of risk rather than relying on an inspection at a particular point in time. And I'm going to discuss this in a bit more detail now. Next slide, please. So what data and information will CQC review? Well, they've said that they're going to consider a practice's current rating, so whether that's outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. They'll consider patient survey data. So this is survey data that providers submit to CQC. CQC will also consider any previous regulatory breaches or any open breaches. So, for example, if during your last inspection you were found to be in breach of Regulation 17, which is in relation to good governance, CQC are going to consider that and see if any improvements have been made to address that regulatory breach. CQC will also consider whistleblowing and complaints, as well as safeguarding concerns. And in relation to that, they're going to be looking at patterns and themes rather than individual complaints. So, for example, if a number of patients are complaining that they're struggling to get GP appointments, that might make CQC think that there's a theme or pattern, and they'll want to review that and monitor it in more detail. During the September webinar, CQC also said that some of the data they'll be considering for GP practices are prescribing indicators, disease management indicators, and also patient experiences. So that also links with the second bullet point of patient survey data. Next slide, please. So CQC is going to consider the data and information it holds on a service as a whole on a monthly basis. And it will then determine its monitoring approach based on the level of risk and whether that risk is low, medium, or high. Next slide, please. So this slide here is from one of CQC's slides, and it illustrates how CQC is going to carry out its new monitoring approach. So as you can see here, CQC starts off by carrying out an information review and considers all the data it holds on a service. And CQC then decides if the risk is low, medium, or high. And as you can see, that leads to different actions and different monitoring, and I'll discuss that in more detail now. Next slide, please. So if CQC deems that a GP practice is at low risk, what they will do is they'll publish an assurance statement on CQC's website. So a number of you will already be seeing this on the provider page on CQC's website, and you'll be getting an email from CQC each month as well, which informs you about the assurance statement. So the purpose of these statements is to inform the public that CQC has not found any evidence at that particular time that the rating needs to be reassessed. So yeah, that's what will go on the website. There'll also be a link on CQC's website, which is for members of the public to click on to provide feedback to CQC in relation to any concerns that the public might have about a practice. This is refreshed each month, and there's ongoing monitoring on a monthly basis. Next slide, please. So if CQC deems that a practice is at medium risk, this leads to further direct monitoring activity, and that's the acronym DMA. And the outcome from the DMA is either an on-site inspection or further monitoring. Next slide, please. So CQC's DMA will involve direct communication between CQC, so between a CQC inspector and a GP practice, and that's likely to be a monitoring phone call from your inspector. Do be mindful that if you do have this DMA phone call, that CQC are going to be making they're going to be recording what's been discussed in your conversation. So just be really mindful about what information you're giving to them. And the two possible outcomes from DMA are either ongoing monitoring, and that's if CQC is assured about the risk, so assured that the practice has steps in place to address any issues and manage risk. Or the second outcome is an on-site inspection, and that's if CQC are not assured on the back of a DMA monitoring call. And that will lead to an on-site inspection, and I'll obviously talk about that in more detail in a moment. The key thing to remember is that the DMA will not change a service's rating. So the only way for a rating to change is if an on-site inspection is carried out. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, if a service is deemed to be high risk, and that's based on the information and data that CQC's reviewed, and also as a result of the DMA monitoring call, it will lead to an on-site inspection. Next slide, please. So inspections are no longer based on frequency thresholds and fixed timeframes. And CQC is targeting its inspection activity based on risk. And what that means in practice is that the actual number of physical inspections that are taking place is currently very low. Whilst that's great for GP practices that are rated as outstanding, does cause some concerns for other practices who are rated as requires improvement and good. And I'll talk about some of these concerns now on the next slide. Next slide, please. So in terms of the concerns, well, with there being a focus on risk, what that means is that there's a shift from looking for good and outstanding to non-compliance with the regulations. So with risk-based monitoring and reliance on intelligence, CQC is focusing on negative findings. And in terms of what we've seen at our firm, we've seen an increase in enforcement activity. And with this focus on risk, that's only likely to get worse because CQC are less likely to notice good things about a service. This is a particular issue for GP practices which are rated as requires improvement. And there's also implications for services that are rated as good, but striving for outstanding, because what it means is that these practices aren't likely to be inspected anytime soon. Next slide, please. There's also a heavy reliance now on what people tell CQC. And there's little opportunity to provide context to what people are saying or to challenge. And so there's an issue in relation to how CQC inspectors are assuring themselves of the validity of the data that they are relying on to assess risk. You know, with there not being as many on-site inspections, it's likely to mean that CQC aren't picking up on good practice. They're only reviewing data. And that's, you know, when you're reviewing something on a screen in a monitoring app style, there's more likely to be a focus on the negative findings. So there's some of the potential problems. Next slide, please. So that was an overview of CQC's updated new strategy and its monitoring approach. And obviously I've highlighted what it involves. It's all in relation to risk, whether that's low, medium or high. And whilst there are concerns with this new approach, as a regulator, CQC often changes the way it carries out inspections, but the same principles still apply. And so, you know, whilst it can be concerning, there's things that you can do as providers to ensure that your service is reflected in the best way possible. And there's more to follow now in relation to handling CQC inspections from my colleague Maddie Gaunt. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was really informative. I'm going to hand straight over to Maddie. As Anna has said, she is going to talk around how to handle a CQC inspection and the types of issues that can arise. So hopefully give you some top tips on how to do that. Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you, Caroline, and thanks, Anna. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Really, my talk is just to cover a few of those additional things that are worth bearing in mind if they do get to that point where they actually come into your service and cross the threshold. And hopefully a few of these points might help you get the best out of that inspection, even if they come in with that focus on risk. Can I have the first slide, please? So I think, as Annie set out, we are going to be looking at a new approach to inspections. And although historically the vast majority of GPs were actually rated good, I think it's a really critical time just to be aware of complacency. They're going to come in now with a new focus on risk, and they're going to probably be looking and pulling you upon things that you might not have encountered in inspections before. So, for example, governance is a particular issue, and they will really be looking for ongoing improvement and that commitment to making sure things that might have happened in the past aren't arising again. So, as Anna said, although the strategy may be changing, we think really from an inspection process and from a provider side, the same principles can apply, at least at this stage of the inspection. And you can still take steps by good preparation and a few things you can do during and after the inspection that can help you firstly get the best out of the inspection, get the best report, or if you're rated, rating in the first place. If you don't get that, these steps may also help you deal with a poor draft report if you need to, or propose ratings that you don't agree with. And if you can't deal with it at that stage even, and you may have to take things further, these steps will also hopefully help you protect that position going forward as far as you can. So can I have the first slide, please, Annie? So I think as part of your preparation, and this is particularly if your inspection's announced, but it may not be, it is helpful if you can to try and take a step back and understand the framework under which the CQC are operating. Knowledge really is power when it comes to CQC, and the more you know about them and their functions and how they exercise their discretion, the better you're going to be able to engage with them in the longer term. It's also important to remember what the inspection is there for, remember what they're there to look for. They're very process driven, they will do things in a certain way, they will want to see evidence, and they are likely to shift focus depending on what's a political or media hot topic at the time, for example. Now, if you do need a reminder of what the CQC are looking for when you're preparing, there's a few really helpful guides on the CQC website. Now, CQC guidance is not the law, but they are helpful in this context. The first one there really just gives you a summary of what to expect during, after the inspection and beyond it in ratings. But the second two are particularly important in this context. The guidance on meeting the regulations sets out for you not only what the regulations actually say, but what in the CQC's eyes they see as compliant. And remember, actually, what the inspection is there to do is to check you're meeting your regulatory requirements. Now, we've put some other guidance up there, particularly if you're looking at ratings, have a think about the CLOEs. That will help you determine where you actually should be pitched, whether you should be good or outstanding. And it might also give you some sort of key points as to how you can drag yourself up into that next bracket if you're nearly there. The GP Mythbusters you should already be aware of, but I mentioned in passing because they're a really good source to sort of get to grips with what the CQC see are current topics for you in the GP sector. And again, just a very quick passing reference to CQC internal guidance. You won't have access to this normally, but actually if you're challenging things later on, it can be helpful to know there is guidance there that they are meant to be following. So can I have the next slide, please? So I think once you've got that framework in mind, you're in a much better place to actually prepare yourself for the inspection. And there's a few key things you can just get done. Firstly, try and engage positively with the CQC whenever you can, whether that's in the risk monitoring calls that Anna discussed, the DMA process. You know, the more positively you engage with them throughout this process, the less risky you're going to seem in their eyes. Really important one to remember is your third party. So this is not only your patients, but also other agencies, other healthcare providers involved in your practice. Not only is, you know, coordination of healthcare a really hot topic, but also they are going to be asked for feedback, whether it's through patient surveys and other methods, or whether they're directly contacted. And if their feedback is good, it will definitely go in your favour. Now, once you understand this framework, it's quite important, if you can, to try and undertake some form of quality assurance exercise. Now, you can do this with an independent consultant, or you can just do it yourself. But you want to be testing your own systems, processes, or staff complying with what they're meant to be doing. Is practice functioning in the way you expect it to? Test your own governance systems, and if you're not finding things, you need to deal with that very quickly before an inspection happens. As part of this process, don't forget to look at your documentation and paperwork. CQC do take a lot of pops at sloppy paperwork, and you just don't want to make it easy for them to find problems. And another important one is just to remember any past shortfalls or concerns that have been raised. Now, whether this was by the CQC, whether this was actually regulatory breaches or not, these tend to be the areas of focus for inspection, because they're going to be the things that they think are at risk at any one time. So while you're going through all this process, try and be as self-critical as you can. It can be difficult, but it will enable you to find things and fix them before the inspection happens. If you can't fix everything, prioritise those you need to do to meet your regulatory requirements. And anything, that's an obvious risk or hot topic. So as Anna mentioned, access to GP appointments or remote prescribing at the moment, for example. Don't forget the simple things. Make sure your ratings displayed properly. Make sure your complaints policies are out. They're easy to overlook, but they're also easy to fix in advance. And in your preparation, also don't forget to push for outstanding. Now, they might be coming thinking you're a risk, but actually, if your service is performing well, you want to get ready to be able to actually show that as far as you can. So can we have the next slide, please? So as part of your preparation, I do think it's key to remember how important your staff are. Now, the CQC tend to look at HR and training records anyway, so do make sure they're in order if you can. But beyond that, your staff are going to be the face of the service at the inspection. Inspectors are going to be looking at you and your staff and how you actually function in practice, and you want them and yourself to perform well on the day. Additionally, your staff might also have to be your eyes and ears. You can't be everywhere at once in an inspection, and you may need to rely on things they've said or engagements they had with the inspector to challenge things later on in the process. So remember, this is stressful for everyone, and try and support your staff and empower them, because that's going to get the best out of them on the day. You want them, for example, to demonstrate they're properly trained and they're competent. You want them to perform well under the pressure of the inspection environment, to show the inspector that you are a good practice and you know what that looks like. And also, it is important that your staff have the confidence to challenge or ask questions of the inspection team if that becomes necessary during the day. So it might seem very simple, but it's quite helpful just to remind everyone in the practice what the inspection process involves. Tell them what to expect, remind them that the CQC are going to be probably looking for risk and will be asking questions. Giving them forewarning is likely to help them perform in the best way they can, given the tools they've got. Remember to reinforce their knowledge of your own systems and processes. Make sure they're aware of what policies are in place, how they function, that they're being compliant with them, but also that they know how to use computer systems and where to find things, because it's a very common criticism that arises in draft reports. Another point, generally, try and promote that awareness of any hot topics or any past concerns that the CQC have raised in the practice, because they're likely to be the focus of any risk-based inspection. And you're going to want your staff to be pretty hot on those topics if you can. And again, just as a general point, do try and just promote this positive culture. It's another hot topic at the CQC. And if they come in and your staff are happy, engaging well with each other, smiling, feel part of the practice, that is going to present well on the day. So can we have the next slide, please? So by the time we get to the inspection, assuming you've prepared, you should actually really be okay. But again, they're going to be there looking for risk, and there are a few things that you can remember to try and help protect yourself going forward. So it might seem obvious, but however stressful it gets, try and be helpful, respectful and professional, but do expect the same in return from them. And if you're finding the inspection team are not giving you that, you might need to take that further. Remember to ask questions, make sure you understand what they are saying to you and vice versa, and that they understand your practice and any particular geographic issues that you might be having, for example. They may well be coming in with preconceptions of risk, and you're going to want to help show them that they're wrong, of course, in a polite way. It's really critical to keep records if you can. Obviously, it's difficult to write everything as you go, but try and keep a note throughout the day. Keep records in particular of what the inspector says, good and bad, and what you say in response. Any documents they access or look at, or similarly any they refuse to look at. And if there's anything that you're going to follow up with or they're going to follow up with, make a note of what that entails and when it's going to be done by, because you may need to fall back on that. During the inspection, remain mindful of these hot topics in regulatory history, because again, they are going to be the things that they're asking about. And if they're not asking questions about them, they may even be areas where you can really demonstrate this positive improvement and get up towards this actually feeling of good governance rather than bad. If the CQC do identify concerns on the day, do try and address them at the time if you can. If that's not possible, get a plan in place and make sure the CQC are aware that these things have been dealt with, so they don't need to be concerned and hopefully don't even need to mention in the report at all. If anything does happen on the day that you're not expecting, there's a big incident, try not to panic. Let your staff deal with it calmly and safely, let their training kick in, and provided your systems and processes are effective, actually you may be able to show them very good practice there rather than bad. Finally, sorry to keep banging on about it, but during the inspection as well, don't forget to push for better. They might be coming in looking for bad, but if there's something positive you want to show them in the areas they're looking at, if you don't put it forward, nobody else is going to for you. Next slide, please. So once you've got the inspection out of the way, you've all breathed a sigh of relief. There are still things you can do, and there's a relatively sort of small margin of time in which you can still have quite a significant influence on what goes into the report itself and possibly any other activity the CQC may be thinking about. A few points here. So if there's anything to follow up, do what you say you were going to by the time you say you would. And if it is in any way unclear, get clarification, because you're going to be criticised if you don't follow up on those things. Do consider and address any feedback you get as soon as possible. Now, this may come in dribs and drabs on the day afterwards, but each piece of feedback might give you further sort of pointers on what you need to be doing next. If you have time, try and have a debrief with your staff. Now, this not only helps them feel a bit supported, but also they may raise points that happen during the inspection or issues you weren't even aware of that you now need to address. Again, once you've taken stock, do try and reflect on the inspection and all the feedback you've got as a whole. Think about whether there's anything you need to do before that draft report comes in. Do you need to be setting the record straight if they've misunderstood something? Do you want to follow up with further information? A common criticism is, we haven't seen these records. You might be able to send them in now and that problem might go away. If the inspection did go badly, start getting prepared in this immediate aftermath. Don't necessarily wait for the CQC to tell you what they want you to do. Learn lessons, address the problems, because the earlier you do so, the better position you're likely to be in the next stages that might come. And again, same point, sorry again, don't forget to push for the good. If your feedback makes it look like they're not accepting all the positives you put forward, do feel free to make that case for the record yet again. Next slide, please. So we're not actually today going to cover the inspection report and ratings process in any detail. I'm afraid there's way too much to cover in a short webinar, but it is important to forget this part of the process in the inspection. So usually after inspection, can be within a couple of weeks, can be much longer, you're going to get a draft inspection report. And just on this slide, it's just a few reminders about how you might want to handle that. You get 10 working days to submit factual accuracy comments, which will go quickly. And even if the report doesn't seem that bad on the face of it, and there are limits to that process, if you don't challenge things, you're going to be deemed to accept them. So facts can be really important. Think about that detail. Language can make a huge difference to a reader. A few changed words here and there can absolutely change the overall tone of the report. If you do have any regulatory breaches or ratings that you don't agree with in the report, it can be also quite important to challenge them at this stage if there are grounds to do so. And you're going to need to remember in the factual accuracy stage, if you want to submit any challenges, you're going to need to be prepared to evidence them, otherwise they're unlikely to be successful. Again, in this inspection report stage, don't forget to keep thinking about what happens next. There may already be things happening in parallel, so enforcement proceedings or involvement from NHS trusts, but you also might want to be thinking about wider implications about what you might want to be doing before any report even gets published. So do you need to sort out a press strategy, for example? So next slide, please. So I think I've probably gone way over time, and apologies for that. And I do hope that that's been a helpful, albeit very quick overview of some of the things you can be doing, really just to help yourself get the best out of these inspections, even if they're coming in with this new risk focus. I think in conclusion, it's fair to say that the new strategy is going to see a more negative inspection experience for GPs, particularly in these first few months as the strategy starts to settle. We may see things change, and there's probably going to be new guidance out, but just keep an eye out for that. I think for the time being, really our advice hasn't changed. You can still help yourself to get the most out of that inspection experience, understanding the framework that you're actually working to, preparing yourself and your staff, conducting yourself well during the inspection and after the inspection can make all the difference. And if it goes well, in theory with these steps, that should allow you to help yourself get the recognition you deserve. And if it goes badly, it will at least help you mitigate any damage that might arise. So finally, sorry to make another lawyer's point here, but if you are in doubt at any stage, or if you're in any way worried about when the inspection went, and particularly if there's any warning of enforcement activity, we would advise you, if you can, to get legal advice as soon as possible, because the earlier you understand what your options are, the better you're going to be able to handle whatever it is that the CQC do throw at you next. So that's it from me today. Thank you for listening, and I think we've got some time for some Q&As, so I'm going to pop back now to Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maddie. That was a really helpful overview. And in fact, we have had some questions, and I'm not going to let you off the hook, Maddie. I'm going to come straight back to you, because you've made this point during your presentation around, obviously, CQC coming in looking for risk, but trying to push for outstanding. And one of the questions that we've had in is, can the demonstration of improvements be used to mitigate risks, or is the regulator simply bypassing this?
I think I would absolutely say yes, it can be. Remember, they are there to look at the whole risk profile of the service. They're not there to pick out individual problems. They're there to decide whether you are providing a safe and quality service. And actually, demonstrating improvements is, if you think back to those characteristics of what they should be looking for, is showing good governance. If you fix things that have gone wrong in the past, if you are generally improving, particularly if you have, geographical things in your local area that, you need to improve immunisation take-up or something, those really should be taken on board by the CQC, because actually in the whole governance picture and the picture of how you're performing as a service overall, that is quite important. The CQC might not see it that way, but I would stress, it is important to put forward these positives whenever you can, if you feel it is important and demonstrates your service is safe and a quality service.
I mean, I think you made the point, Maddie, that no one else is going to put your case forward. So it really is up to providers to put forward as much positive information as they can to CQC. So thanks for that. Anna, we've had a question about, obviously, we're talking about CQC going basic inspections around risk. We've obviously moved away from timetabled inspections. Someone has said, are we ever likely to go back to a fixed timetable of inspections?
Yeah, so that's a good question, actually. CQC has said that its current monitoring approach is an interim approach as it moves towards implementing its new regulatory model in 2022. But it goes back to what I said at the start of the webinar, and that is that CQC is using this approach to develop how it will work in the future, and they want there to be a more real-time, up-to-date focus on risk, rather than relying on frequency-based inspections at a particular point in time. That said, during the webinar in September, CQC also said that they're currently internally working out ways in which to recognise innovation and improvements in practices. But at this stage, it's unclear what that's going to look like in practice.
Okay, Thank you, Anna. So something to look out for. Maddie, what should a practice do if they have any concerns about an inspector's conduct on the day of the inspection? Itself, have you got any pointers for people there?
I think it's a very common complaint, but the first thing to think about is depends on the situation. There's very much a balance in these cases between maintaining a positive relationship with your inspection team. Remember, they might come back another time. But actually, if there is any problems with their conduct or professionalism on the day, it is important to raise that, because if you don't, they're never going to change. It's important not to just complain because you don't like the outcome or you don't get on with the inspectors, because that is going to come across as, this sour grapes. But if you have grounds to complain, I think it's very important that you do make that known. Now, how you do that, again, is worth considering, depending on the circumstances and depending on what you're trying to achieve by making the complaint. You might want to raise it informally. You might just want to send, put it on the record to the inspector so they're aware of it. Or you might want to actually consider making a formal complaint to the CQC. Now, if you are going to make a formal complaint, there's a few things you might want to do. Make a note of your concerns contemporaneously, so it's fresh, you've got the evidence you need to support it, because even complaints with the CQC need to be based on evidence. Try and take any emotion out of it, although the inspection process can be really stressful and a lot of people feel really got at when they're getting negative feedback. You need to step back and keep to the facts. What is it have they done that's wrong? And what was the outcome of that, which is usually a negative one. And remember, actually, just in the grand scheme of the inspection process and the other processes that the CQC will be going through, the complaint process is a process in itself. It runs separately, and in theory, it shouldn't have any direct bearing on your inspection report. So, for example, your report might be published well in advance of any complaint ever being resolved. Having said that, in some cases, with the right scenario and the right evidence, and depending on what else is going on, actually well-targeted complaints can be very effective in resetting that relationship with the regulator. So in sum, if you have problems with their conduct and professionalism, firstly, take a step back, calm down. Then think about actually how serious their conduct is and what they've done. And if there's an issue there, if there's still an issue there, raise it. But then you want to just think about how the best way to raise it is, given the context and your circumstances that you're facing.
Thank you, Maddie. Anna, you touched on this briefly in your presentation, but a question here. One of the GP practices has received a communication from the CQC that they're satisfied and don't require an inspection. So they're wondering how long that might give them inspection immunity.
Yeah, so CQC they've made it quite clear that they're reviewing, they're carrying out their direct monitoring on a monthly basis. And they said that inspections can happen at any time. So it's something, you don't want to be really anxious about it, but it's something to be aware of, that at any time CQC could deem that the risk is greater and come in and re-inspect the service, carry out an inspection of the service. I think the best thing that you can do is really try and highlight and showcase the positive areas within your practice. So if you are receiving good patient feedback, make sure you share that with CQC and let them know what a good job you're doing, really sell yourself. Also, if there are any complaints about your service, make sure that you're following your complaints policy and that you're responding to these complaints and addressing them promptly. Because with this focus on data review and a review of information, you need to make sure that the data you have and the information you have is the best that it can be. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. I had another question. Can the provider get a copy of the recorded DMA call if necessary? I'm happy to take that. In relation to, I think we always advocate to providers, and it's the same when you've had physical inspections. When you're having your feedback session, make sure you have someone in the room taking detailed notes, and that is their only job, to take a note of the conversation. So you've got a contemporary note, and the same would apply in terms of the call, the DMA core. I think, you know, what we might find is that CQC may be reluctant to provide that information. We've had that with inspection notes. It's been an ongoing issue over the years when we have requested the contemporary inspection notes from CQC. They went through a phase of providing them, then they went through a phase of not providing them, then they redacted information, then they didn't. They haven't quite made up their mind how much information they're going to provide. And the difficulty is that, you know, from our perspective, why would you not share the information that you are making your judgments and basing your judgments on? It's what they found on the day. So I think certainly you could ask for it, but I also think that you should take your own notes of the conversation, and I say have someone whose job it is just to make those notes, not the person having the conversation, because you can't make a detailed note and have a conversation at the same time. So that's what I would say. Maddie, we've obviously touched on inspection reports, ratings. Obviously ratings impact practices quite significantly, but what else could happen if an inspection goes wrong or badly? Is there, you mentioned enforcement action during your talk, so do you want to just talk us through what else might happen?
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. I mean, I think as Caroline said, there's all sorts of things like, you know, at the lower level before they really kick into this enforcement. And remember, that actually can making all sorts of demands off you as well. If they get into the enforcement phase, they've got a really wide toolkit of things that they can throw at you. And it's worth noting they are getting keener on enforcement, and we are seeing a trend towards them being a little bit more heavy-handed with this type of thing. You could just end up with a poor rating or a reg breach that in the future could cause you problems. But once you get those reg breaches, they tend to start going further. So you may be seeing low-level stuff like warning notices, fixed penalty notices. Now, it's worth actually saying that I say they're low-level, but these are important. They're black marks on your record. And while many providers might just be inclined to sort of go, okay, fine, take them on the chin, actually, it's worth remembering that it's sometimes really important even to challenge those lower level enforcements. But there are obviously a very wide range of powers. At the upper end, you've got things like, you know, they can start imposing conditions on your practice. Very serious cases, you know, they can start suspending you, you know, not allowing you to operate anymore. They can take all sorts of urgent action, and sometimes actually they can, you know, take very urgent action under various provisions under the acts that they operate under. I think really important to remember is actually you sometimes never know when enforcement's going to come either. It can come very quickly after your inspection, you know, sometimes literally within hours. Sometimes it can be really slow burning. You think you might have got away with it, and suddenly 6 weeks later, something drops on your doorstep. Sometimes they will warn you these things are coming, sometimes they won't. But I think that, again, just refers back to what I was saying about start preparing yourself if you think when things went wrong. And I think important for enforcement, again, is just bear in mind that you might be stuck in loads of parallel processes. You might be having a factual accuracy comments to deal with. You might have one warning notice, but you might also be facing some sort of enforcement proceedings at the same time. It's not uncommon that you're going to have to firefight a lot of enforcement on a lot of fronts. But that's also just why, you know, I emphasise why it's really important if things do start looking bad to try and take stock and, you know, protect yourself as far as you can, but also understand what the options and what things might be happening later on. And because steps you take then can make a big difference down the route of enforcement further down.
Lovely, thank you, Maddie. I am conscious that we haven't got through all the questions, but also that we are now at 45 minutes. So I think we'll start wrapping it up. If you do have any questions, then please do get in contact. You know, we're here to help, and we you know, if you want to get in contact via the website or simply give us a call, then please do so. Our details are all listed on this final slide, and if you do want to find out more about how Ridouts can help your practice, then our website is there /general practitioners, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Hope you found it useful, and take care. Thank you.